Every now and then I come across something that I find relatively amusing, maybe mildly annoying, or at the very least worth sharing. And these are things that I might message a friend about, or I might tell my husband about, and then I don't know. I think a lot of us have a lot of really fun, interesting conversations, and a lot of you have really great input whenever certain topics come up. And I feel like sharing with all of you these things as well. And so for today, we're kind of doing something along those lines. I saw something, I had some thoughts about it, and I thought it'd be interesting to get your perspective. I do want to say, I know I haven't really highlighted what the point of this is or this specific topic, but if you do enjoy what you're going to see today, there is a video that I did about a year or so ago that follows a similar blueprint, you could say, which is just looking at what I'm calling recommendation fails. So the video I did about a year or so ago, it was prompted because I was looking at the Goodreads nominees, and I'm not sure, because it does actually change depending on which you're using, if I was on the Goodreads website or the mobile app. But regardless, when I was looking at the nominees and I was looking at specific books, when you scroll down, they'll have a function that says, you know, if you like this, other readers enjoyed this. It's essentially an if you like this, try that, built into Goodreads. And when I happened to scroll far enough down, I don't remember what the book was. I want to say it was Babel, but one of the books had the most absurd, you might also like, recommendations. They were wildly out of nowhere. They were so incredibly random, and it was so funny to me. So then I was thinking, okay, what are some other, is this just for this book, or is this just a thing on Goodreads where it's very incorrect? Because there's certain things that make sense. A lot of times you'll see, if you pick a Sanderson book, for example, it might mention Wheel of Time because there is that crossover where Sanderson finished Wheel of Time. So generally users who like Wheel of Time will probably also have picked up a Sanderson book. There's some obvious crossover that we expect. But truly, I can't highlight enough how bizarre some of the recommendations were. So I made a video about it. And today we're looking at something somewhat similar, except for it's not a piece of technology that is using some form of, I don't know anything about technology, but it's not using some kind of algorithm to figure out the recommendation. These are actually users online, people, real human beings, who have recommended things, and I do not see the overlap even a little bit. And in some instances, it's less about the overlap and it's more about just the way that certain users go about recommending things. So I wanted to share some of those. Before I do, I want to be very clear that I think anybody who has asked, you know, hey, I just checked out this book or this series, I loved it. Does anybody else have some suggestions of more things like this? When people take the time to answer them, I think at the end of the day, that's a really nice thing to do. And a lot of times you're looking at people maybe who are new to a genre, that don't know the genre very well. So it's really kind of people to take time out of their day to give recommendations based off of their, honestly, probably pretty extensive reading of that genre. So I understand that sometimes I just might not agree with some of the recommendations, but some of these, I feel like there's a pattern. And then some of them I just am like, that's not helpful. Can we not do that? Why are we like this as bookworms? So jumping into it, the first example is not a specific, if you like this, try that. It's more of a thing that readers will do that I see this on Reddit all the time. And I'm like, why are you doing that? That's not what they asked. So you'll see sometimes people will ask, hey, I just read Sanderson's Mistborn. I'm using this as an example because I've literally seen this before. But they might also be like, I just started the Farseer series and I'm really, really enjoying it. And then the next thing they'll say is, what should I check out that's like this? And it's every single time pretty much, it feels. I don't think I'm being hyperbolic. I swear every time I see this pop up on Reddit, and it's not just a thing on Reddit, it happens in other areas. It's just Reddit is a written version of this. But every time it feels like somebody will reply not being self-aware, not joking. They will just say, have you tried more Hobb? Have you tried more Sanderson? And I'm always like, not helpful. If they found their way to Reddit, That means they're very capable of typing in the author's name and seeing other works. Or when they were at the bookstore and they picked up that book, they probably saw that there were other books on the shelf. And I understand completely if somebody is like, hey, I just picked up Robin Hobb. I really enjoyed Farseer. What should I read next? If they word it in a way that makes it seem like they're asking within, in this case, Realm of the Elderlings. If they're literally wording it in a way where it could be mistaken as, oh, they're asking what the next thing in Realm of the Elderlings is, then I can understand where there might be some confusion. But that's not what I'm referring to. And I also understand if they're just genuinely very, like I said before, if they're very self-aware and they say something along the lines of, hey, probably goes without saying, but if you didn't know, they actually have a whole world and a ton of other books that exist within it. So if you didn't know, now you do. And that's nice. But when people are just like, I read Mistborn, what should I read next? And someone's like, more Sanderson. I'm like, that's not helpful. Am I the only one that is like, why did you bother? Why did you bother? Because I don't need to say why. I feel like it's pretty clear. It's not even that big of a deal. None of this is a big deal. None of this is a big deal. But I find it like mildly grating because I think a lot of us who love to read and we love when somebody's getting into reading or somebody's getting into the genre that we adore, that we get so excited when they find something they love and we're like, hey, I love this too. I've read so many things. Let me tell you what else you might like. I don't know. Whenever I find out somebody's getting into reading, I will sometimes make entire lists and I'll take screenshots of the cover and then I'll have descriptions and I'll send that all out. And the idea of just being like, did you know they have other books? I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I'm sure they do. Maybe they don't. But still have that little asterisk of you probably are aware. And that, I think, goes a long way. That's not even that big of a deal. Like I said, it's fine. But the next one, genuinely, I was like, hey, no. So that same question, that's what this whole thing is based off of, is somebody saying, I liked this, what should I try? And this second example is another vague example, and then we'll get into some specifics. If you like this, try that. I don't understand the overlap. But somebody was asking about, I think it honestly was another Sanderson book, but I don't know for sure. But they were asking, and you'll see why it doesn't matter. They were asking for some kind of recommendation for if they liked this one fantasy series they'd picked up. And they were specifically saying, I liked these things about this book. What are some other things, or what are some other series or books that have these particular elements to them? And someone replied really long. They left paragraphs about this, about how if you like that, you actually shouldn't look for other things that are similar. You should vary it up. And then they went into this whole analogy, which I know sometimes I have some pretty bad analogies, but they went into this whole analogy about how if you just had food for the first time ever and you really liked this one bit of food that you ate, you wouldn't then go on to only ever eat that, right? You would want to go try all sorts of other kinds of food. And I'm like, that's not their question. That's not, they didn't ask for you to insert your unnecessary, unhelpful, honestly somewhat unrelated opinion. They asked, hey, I like these things about this book. What are some other books that have these things? For you to be like, well, let me just tell you about other books that I like and that I think you should. Let me tell you what you should do. I'm like, the audacity. That's not the question. I don't know. I know that talking about books on BookTube and giving recommendations, I'm not a surgeon. I'm not saving anybody's life. None of this is all that serious at all. Being able to read is a wonderful privilege that so many of us are lucky to have the time and the ability to, and access to books. You know, we have all this to do related to reading, and I'm really grateful for that. But I will say, I take somewhat seriously, even though it's not anybody, you know, nobody's life is on the line. I do take rather seriously when I talk about books, when I'm telling people about books, because I recognize that for a lot of people, they only have so much time to read. They only have so much money to spend on books, or they only have so much time to go to the library and pick up books, if they even have a library in their area. So if they are going to have to be inconvenienced or go out of their way to pick up a book, to get a book, I want to ensure that that time and that money is hopefully going towards something that they're pretty sure they're going to like. So if I just tell I don't know, is that annoying to anyone else that somebody would take the time also to write out this long thing about how you shouldn't keep reading, like, you shouldn't even try to find, that's the thing, it's not, you shouldn't even try to find things that are similar in any fashion to the thing you already know you like. You need to vary it up. I just think that's a little, it's very, you just like to hear yourself, or you like to read back what you write, because I guess you're not saying it out loud, but it's just so unnecessary. Am I the only one that finds that really annoying? Anyway, getting to some specifics of books where I already explained this, but somebody says, hey, I liked this, what should I try? And then the things that people are recommending, I kind of don't really see it. So, the first one, we have, if you like Robin Hobb, somebody was saying, I like Robin Hobb, what should I read? And somebody suggested, and this isn't annoying to me by any means, I just genuinely don't see the comparison here, but they said if you like Robin Hobb, check out the Greenbone saga. I don't really think those are all that related, and the problem with some of these recommendations, because there are some times where somebody will say a recommendation, and at first I don't see it, and then they explain, and I'm like, oh, okay, that I can see what you're talking about. That specific element, you're right, they do have that in common. With Hobb, I don't really see the relation to Greenbone, and I didn't see an explanation or any kind of layout of, in this series, the way that they approach world building, or the way that the plot progresses, the writing style, the setting, which certainly wouldn't make any sense because the settings are very different, but there was no further elaboration. So I don't know, I looked at that and I'm like, sure, of course there's some overlap with people who like Robin Hobb end up liking Greenbone. They're pretty well-liked series, so I suppose there's a chance, but I couldn't figure out where they were drawing that comparison, because Robin Hobb has kind of a slow writing style. With Farseer in particular, you are really only with Fitz, and Fitz is somebody who is not, you can almost argue he's not the main character, which I know sounds odd, but with the bigger plot of what's going on, it's almost like he is somebody who's caught within it as opposed to the major player. And you're kind of following him as he lacks any kind of, like he doesn't really have a whole lot of say in his own life, and you're watching what that does to his mental health, to his emotional well-being, and how that really weighs on him. And then the worlds are very, very different, as Greenbone is much more urban, and the magic in these is quite different. Like Greenbone Saga, I could more so see being compared to maybe more like a Mistborn magic system, because the magic systems are a little bit harder. I feel like in Hobbs, a lot of it is, there's magic in the world, but it's almost, now I'm maybe more so thinking live ship, but it's almost like the origin of the magic and discovering more about it and understanding it better, because it's slightly lost. The truth of it is slightly lost to this current group of people in this time. And Greenbone, it's like a crime family utilizing magic. So I don't know. I don't see it. I'm curious if you do. Another thing that came up a lot is that no matter what somebody asked, no matter what series was the first one presented, there is a interesting habit of people just recommending Malazan, which I don't mind at all if people are recommending Malazan. I know a lot of people really, really love that series. They really appreciate how extensive the world building is. They love how deep the lore is, how many characters, how much time you're looking at, how many things that you cover. And it's on a scale that oftentimes people have not seen before. I think what can be tricky about a series like that is there aren't too many series that are that large in scope, and on top of all of that, that are known for being this endeavor, this challenge. That's a big thing that gets presented when people talk about Malazan is, okay, so you gotta buckle in, you're probably gonna have to read the series more than once, you might want to take notes, or you might want to make sure after every single book that you kind of collect your thoughts, chat with other people in the fandom will definitely be happy to talk to you about what was going on. And that's not a typical selling point or reading experience that you find with a lot of other doesn't matter the genre, just a lot of other books and series. So I think it's kind of difficult to compare Malazan, and actually if anybody wants to say if you like Malazan, check this other thing out. But it gets mentioned constantly, and a couple of examples that I wrote down is, sorry to keep bringing up Sanderson in this video, but somebody said, I just finished Mistborn, oh my gosh, blew my mind, what else should I read? And someone said Malazan, and I'm like, those are not similar. The world of Mistborn is a lot more contained. Even in the setting, you're primarily focused on the city of Luthadel. You do expand a bit, but ultimately, maybe if you were saying Cosmere to Malazan, because Cosmere is like the whole universe or something, but this person was specifically saying Mistborn. So I'm like, the magic is a much harder and super explained magic system where there's basically even a tutorial of the main character in the first one, Kelsey, or telling the other main character, like, this is how allomancy works. Press triangle to use this. Like, that's what it feels like, a video game tutorial. So it's very well explained. And then in Malazan, it's like, what are they doing right now? When you're first exposed to magic in Malazan, it's not explained at all. So I was like, okay, the magic's not similar. Maybe there's a little bit of similarities in the setting, but I don't really think so because the scale is so different across the two. The characters, you're very focused on Vin and Kelsier, and I think there's a lot more of an intimate connection with those characters and almost a character study, especially with Vin. Throughout the series, and with Malazan, I feel like you get glimpses of people throughout time, and then these major players kind of come back into the equation. Also, I'm not a Malazan expert, I've just read a couple of the books. Once again, same with the Hob Greenbone thing. Sure, it's like, let's throw whatever at the wall and see what sticks. There's a decent chance, because Malazan's well-liked among a lot of fantasy fans, Mistborn's well-liked among a lot of fantasy fans, that maybe there would be some enjoyment, but I certainly wouldn't say that as an answer if somebody was looking for something similar to Mistborn. And then also Stormlight Archive. That's another thing, is somebody said what's like Stormlight Archive and somebody said Malazan. That one makes a little more sense to me because Stormlight's much bigger. But that's it. It's still all the same. Like, Sanderson's writing is very different from Steven Erikson's. The world building is a little bit more present and helpful for the reader, as far as like Sanderson tries to kind of clue you in on things. So aside from size, I don't really see it. But again, if you feel differently and you're like, I actually think it's a great comparison, feel free to say why. I mentioned earlier that you were going to see a pattern, and the pattern is primarily when somebody's asking about a popular fantasy series, the answers will often be other really popular fantasy series. And I don't want to go as far as to say this bothers me, because it doesn't. If you like a popular series, there's a good chance this other one might work for you too. There's a reason that there's popularity across the series. But it's more that, I don't know, if I'm looking for a recommendation, I'm probably looking to hopefully find people that have a little more knowledge, that maybe aren't just going to tell me the ones that are going to pop up on every list, it feels like. If you type in greatest fantasy series of all time, most popular fantasy series of all time, all the ones I'm talking about, they're not exactly hidden gems. They're all really well-known fantasy series. So I guess I get a little bit bummed, because I would be like, yeah, I saw that. I was kind of hoping for something different, but maybe I do just need to... I guess the reason I'm saying it's irritating is because there's a good chance that the person has read these. Maybe not if they're brand new, but sometimes they will even say, I've read this, here are some other things I've read, here are ones that I ended up liking, here's why I didn't like these. The original, I guess the original poster, the OP, often will give a thorough explanation as to what they're looking for and what they've read already. Anyway, you get it. Let me go to some other ones. So this one I feel like was weirdly more absurd to me, which is that if you like Mistborn, sticking with the Mistborn one, that you will probably like First Law by Joe Abercrombie. And I think this is almost arguably more bizarre to me than Malazan, because First Law is very rooted in cynical realism. It's very low magic. It's very meandering. It is not plot-centered even a little bit. Mistborn feels intentional, and it's one of those series that once you've read it, you go back and you see all the pieces laid out. A lot of us know that Sanderson plots quite extensively, but you can see it in hindsight, and then also, as you're reading through it, there is a direction we're going toward. In Mistborn in particular, you could argue that's different for some of his other series or books, but in Mistborn, we have a goal, we're going towards this goal, we have a main antagonist, we're trying to go against that, and First Law is not like that even a little bit. The characters are also very different. I think they're... we end up liking them, but on surface level, it's like we shouldn't like them. They seem as though they should be characters that we all collectively hate, but Joe Abercrombie has a way of endearing you to the worst members of society, you could almost say. And Mistborn, it's like, yeah, it's a hero, maybe a flawed hero, but like, yeah, they're the good guys. And that's not really the impression that I get from First Law at all. Anyway, so what's fun is now looking at Malazan specifically. When people have read Malazan, they say, hey, I've read Malazan. I love it. What else is there? So I had posed that question earlier, and here's what some people answered. Some people answered The Faithful and the Fallen. And Faithful and the Fallen is, I'd say, a criticism that some people put toward it, but also something a lot of people like about it, is that it feels like classic fantasy. It feels like we have these characters that we know, like these are the good characters, and then you have these other characters over here, and it's like those are the bad guys. And it uses a lot of elements of classic fantasy. I think there's giants and things like that. It's been a while since I read the first book in that series, and I didn't read on, but there are elements to it that are reminiscent of classic fantasy. And Malazan, there's like Assassin's Guild, so there's some things like that. And I know that there's some pieces of things like Forgotten Realms where you're kind of pulling from that, almost like the Dungeons and Dragons feel, but then just go wild with it sort of thing. But that's the thing, is this one feels like go wild with it. Like it went through some vortex and then came out really different. And then Faithful and the Fallen, it feels more like what we're accustomed to. So that one made no sense to me. And then the other one was Black Prism. I really don't think Black Prism and Malazan feel that similar. One of them reads, as far as its writing style, a little bit more YA. Steven Erickson's writing is not the one I'm talking about. I'm talking about Black Prism's writing. The magic is a lot harder of a magic system. I could kind of understand if somebody's looking for something for Mistborn because of the magic. I think Black Prism would be a more accurate in that sense, not necessarily the way in which the characters are written or anything like that. But Black Prism, I just really don't think is similar. But I'm curious if you all agree or disagree. So, and also for any of the ones mentioned, what would you recommend? In case anybody finds this video and they're like, I actually am looking for recommendations for these series, because it can be very helpful. And for the ones that if you disagreed and you're like, no, here's why I think it's actually very much like this other thing, feel free to elaborate on that, because there might be elements that I'm not even pinpointing or thinking of. But anyway, that's it for this very random recommendations fails. If you like this video, I'll have the Goodreads recommendation fails in the description bar down below. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.